Welcome to the Dark Nook Monster Shop. Hey, anybody remember Cootie? It was a game when I was a kid. It was kind of like a monster bash. You had all these parts, the head, the ears, the body, the legs, and then you roll the dice to get a body part, and the first one to fully assemble their Cootie wins. I was thinking about that game recently and I got to thinking, hey, what if I made a creepy, realistic version of a Cootie? That might look kind of cool. So I'm going to do that. First, I need a foil pickle for the body. So I make a foil pickle. Then I smash one end flat. And I make a foil ball for the head. Next, I jam a kebab skewer into the flat end of the foil pickle, which is probably the weirdest thing I've said all week. Then I cut off the other end of the skewer and stick on the head. Okay, now I need legs. 6 of them. So I use floral wire to make legs. I cut 3 pieces to the same length and bend them around into little hoops. Then I hot glue the legs into position over the body. And I guess since it has 6 legs, that means the Cootie is some kind of bug. Which makes sense. I've always thought they were supposed to be like lice or a bed bug or something like that, just like a gross bug, which is kind of weird when you think about it being a kid's game. When the glue cools, I use some pliers on the wires to make knees and feet. Time for some foam clay. Now this first pass is just for coverage, just to cover the foil. I'm going to add 2 or 3 or maybe 4 more layers. So what I'm doing here in terms of actual detail doesn't really matter, it's just basic shape. I flatten out some clay and smooth it over the foil. And I just keep adding more clay until the foil is completely covered. I use a ball stylus tool to push a couple of eye dents into the foil on the head before covering that with clay. I shape out a very basic face. Next, I start on the body, just building up the shape. These guys have a segmented body that kinda looks like a caterpillar, so I need to build up these ridges. I build them up rough though, and I smooth the clay back down on the edges. Then I add in some basic wrinkles, or at least an idea of where I might put wrinkles later. After that's all roughed out, I pick out some eyes. I think these are supposed to be frog's eyes, and I'm going to turn them sideways. I want this guy to have kind of a cute feel, but also kind of a weird, cringy grossness to him. I use a brush to smooth and shape the ridges a bit more. Then I go over them with a texture roller. But I am going to add more. I'm going to add more bulk and detail and shape. I want these to look almost like they're fat rolls, kind of stretching and pulling at the skin. Then I add a couple of nose holes. And using a different texture roller, I smush in some chunky belly textures around the legs. But I need more, so I build up and I start texturing the surface even more. I glob on more foam clay, and then I shape it a bit with a ball stylus. I want it to look more like skin that's stretched and wrinkling. Then I add some more detail to the face, and I lock the eyes in position by sculpting a border around them when I build up the brow. I shape the brow, and I don't want this guy to look mean or scowly, but I want him to look off-putting. Kind of like, remember when you were in school, there was always that like gross or smelly kid? He wasn't a bad guy, just nobody wanted to hang around with him because he had kind of BO thing going on. And if you don't remember that kid, that's probably because you were that kid. Sorry, I hate to break it to you. Well, that's this guy. He's kind of cringe and a little gross, but, well-intentioned. He's not mean, he's not malicious. He's just a cootie. I smooth everything out with a brush and a texture roller. I switch to some blue clay, and I start to sculpt more of the body. Then I build up more ridges and wrinkles. Then I smooth those out with water and a brush until I like the overall shape. Now I decide to give it a beehole because it is a cootie after all, and, according to Bart Simpson, that's where cooties come from. But whoa, I better blur that out now. I don't want to get demonetized. Next, I use a texture roller to put a texture on it, and then I set it aside to dry. And while that dries, I make the ears by shaping clay over a tool and then bending it into shape and setting it aside to dry. I smush some clay over the wire for the legs and let that dry too. And then I'll add toes later once it's dry. The real secret to using foam clay is learning to do things in stages. To sort of build a framework that you build on later. Everything you do with foam clay happens in stages. So now I make the tongue. The Cootie in the game has a little tiny plastic coiled up tongue. So I'm going to stick with that idea. I coil up a worm of clay and set it aside to dry. Later, when everything's dry, I'm going to poke some holes in the head. Then I'm going to add some glue and attach the ears. Then I poke another hole in the mouth for the tongue, add some glue and stick the tongue in. Then I set it all aside to dry. Once it's all dry, I add a little bit of thinned down foam clay paste right around the edges of where the parts are glued together. This will help blend in the edges and help secure the pieces together, because it acts like glue itself. I do the same thing with the foam clay over the mouth, and then I build up the lips around the tongue. I shape out the face and mouth a bit more and blend it off. And I smooth it with water. I kind of build the mouth around the tongue, and then smooth it around with the water and the brush, and then I add little bits of detail here and there, just repeating this process over and over again until I'm happy with the way it looks. And then last, I stipple some foam clay paste over the edges just to really help blend them in. Once that's all dry, I add some toes to the feet. Then, I paint a thick layer of foam clay paste over the legs. I use some foam clay paste to texture the body, and then I leave it to dry. I coat the eyes with latex to keep the paint off of them, then I let that dry. Now it's ready for paint. I base it out in white. This should help make the colors pop nice and bright. I hit the bottom with blue in all the dark and low points to kind of create a zenithal shading effect. And I mix my paints in this stage with a little bit of Mod Podge so they're a bit translucent. Then I paint the top red. I add a little bit of blue touch up to the bottom with a brush to get any of the spots where the red might have dripped down. Then I paint the head green. Over and over and over again. Light green is a very translucent color and it takes a bunch of coats. Once that dries, I dry brush a little more light yellow over the high points on the face. And then I paint the ears yellow, which also takes several coats. Next, the legs get several coats of yellow. After that, I dry brush just a hint of gold over the cheeks and the brow. I paint some gloopy blood red on the tongue. Then a brown wash over the eyes and a light dusting of brown wash mixed with Mod Podge over the entire piece, so it looks dirty and wet. Because of course it does, it's a Cootie, it just crawled out of some dumpster juice or something, it's gotta be gross. When that's dry, I peel off the latex that's covering the eyes. I clean up around the eyes a little bit, and then I add a little bit more brown wash around the eyes. Next, I coat the tongue in some UV resin, and then I pluck off a tiny bit of the cotton swab and use it to make some drool dripping off the gross tongue. I blast it over and over again with UV light at every step, and when that's all done, the Cootie is all done. Thanks for checking out my video. Please hit like, leave a comment, and subscribe for more creepy creatures and crafty creations from the Dark Nook Monster Shop.